My name is Brandon. Let me tell you about something interesting that happened to me many years ago. My story proves that when you take a different road, you might just meet people you never expected to meet, and you might just have an incredible experience that you never thought you'd have. In 1984, I was 22, and I decided I was going to sell my car and get a van. And right after I got the van, I took all of my money out of the bank. It was all the money that I'd saved. 8 grand in total. Then I decided to pack up and go on the road. I was thinking I might start life over in some new location, so I tried to spend as little money as possible while traveling. I drove from New York to Maine, and I ate cheap and not very often, and I slept in my van. When there wasn't a rest stop or truck stop that I could find, I'd often drive down a dark dirt road so that my van wouldn't stick out while I slept. And on those rare occasions when I found a fresh water source, well, I'd hang out in that spot just a little longer. I started working when I was a teenager, and this was the first time that I was taking time to stop, enjoy a little freedom, have a nice long road trip, and figure out what my future was going to look like. After being on the road for about 2 weeks, I went down this dirt road that didn't seem to be leading me to anything, except for the next mile of dirt road. This road seemed to just go on and on forever, and I just followed this road mile after mile. There was nothing that I could see on either side of the road, except overgrown grass, and I began to wonder why the road was even made in the first place, since it didn't appear to be leading to anything. Well, finally the road ended, and it didn't lead to anything. It just stopped. Where the road stopped, there was a clearing, and to the left of that clearing, there was a stream. Well, I felt like that dirt road had just given me a gift. This perfect little clearing, with the stream giving me all the fresh water that I would need. And it was doubtful that anyone ever traveled that long road, so I could stay there for a while without anyone bothering me or telling me to move along. I had enough food in my cooler for 2 or 3 days, so I decided to stay. It was on the 3rd day that I was in the clearing. I was woken up early in the morning by someone tapping on the windows of my van. I was really surprised because I hadn't seen anyone in all the time I'd been there. A man yelled for me to come out, saying that we needed to talk. I looked out the window and I saw 2 older men. One of them walked with a cane, so I rolled the window down and the man with the cane said, "Son, it isn't safe for you to stay out here all alone." And then he asked me if I had any weapons for protection. I told him I had a knife, and then I pulled it up to show him. Well, the other man said, "Well, that's a sword, not a knife." I chuckled, as did the men, and I said, "Well, that's what I call it." I took notice that the younger man was missing his left hand, but of course I didn't think it was polite to ask about that. So I got out of the van and I introduced myself. The men said that they were Big Ed and Ed Jr. Big Ed said he was 68 and Ed Jr. was 40. The men told me once again that it wasn't safe for me to be where I was, and Big Ed remarked on how one of my rear tires looked kind of low. I asked them if they lived close by because I didn't see any homes or even any other buildings along that road. They said that if I gave them a ride, they'd show me where they lived, so I agreed. They lived in a large cabin, just about a 10-minute drive from where that clearing was that I was in. It wasn't along that long dirt road, but it was pretty close by. As I pulled up to the cabin and stopped the van, I noticed 2 old trucks sitting alongside the cabin, and the men started talking about their trucks and what they were doing with them, and we were just making some small talk. Then they surprised me by offering me a place to stay and a hot meal. Well, I happily took them up on the offer, and that's when I met Betty Jane. Betty was Big Ed's sister, and she also lived at the cabin. As she cooked, she told me that she was 60 years old, and she asked me what my plans were. She wanted to know if I planned on being in the area for a while. I told her that I really didn't have any plans at all. I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants at the moment. Right after lunch, Big Ed was telling me that they had an extra room in the cabin, and he was wondering if I wanted to stay. He said if I could pitch in for some groceries, they'd be fine with me using that extra room as long as I wanted. I thanked them all for their generous offer, and I didn't hesitate to hand them some cash for groceries. A short time later, all of us went into town to get those groceries and a tire for my van. Well, town was over an hour away from the cabin. It was quite the distance. They showed me around town and told me that due to the long drive, if there was anything I needed, it would be wise to get it now, saying that they usually only drove into town every other week. Once I saw how far that drive was, I got my wallet out, handed Betty some more money, and said we should get a little extra food. We got my tire, the groceries, a few other items, and headed back to the cabin. It was on the drive back that Big Ed and Ed Jr. started telling me that I should never go outside once it got dark out. Well, I thought they were joking at first, but they went on to say that strange things happened after dark. They said that was the reason that they were warning me when they first saw my van in the clearing. Ed Jr. asked if I knew how to shoot a gun. I told him no, I'd never had any experience with guns. Then I asked him, do I really need one? The conversation turned rather serious, and I didn't know what to make of it. Did I need to be concerned, or were these people just a little paranoid? Ed Jr. said that once we got back to the cabin, he was going to take me out and show me how to shoot. My stomach suddenly got a knot in it. I didn't know what to make of any of this. I hadn't seen anything more dangerous than a raccoon. But I could tell that both of the Eds, as I called them, believed that there was something that I needed to be ready for. We got back to the cabin, and as we were unloading the truck and putting everything away, I asked if there were any chores that needed to be done around the cabin. These people had been very kind to me, and I wanted to help out wherever I could. Ed Jr. said that he definitely could use a hand with cutting trees and splitting logs. So the next few days were spent with Ed Jr. teaching me to shoot, and both of us cutting down a few trees and splitting and stacking wood. At the end of one of these days of hard work, we had dinner. Then Ed Jr. brought out a couple of cans of beer onto the porch for us. We were just sitting on the porch, chatting and enjoying a cold one, when Big Ed came out the door, and he was reminding us that it's getting dark out. We should come inside. Ed Jr. and I stood up, and just as we were about to go in the door, out of nowhere, a rock twice the size of my fist whizzed right past me, and it landed on the porch next to my feet. Well, I froze, and before I could give any thought to the rock, Ed Jr. shoved me inside the cabin, and Big Ed locked the door. And then he threw this plank across the door. I had never noticed that plank before that moment. The large plank went across the door and locked into place on the other side of the door. The makeshift security measure was genius. But what was going on, I wondered? What's the need for this? I heard Betty whisper, "They're back." And before I could ask any questions, as quick as lightning, the two Eds started pulling planks over the windows. Betty turned out all the lights, and I was told that we all needed to get up into the loft. Once we were upstairs, I asked them what was going on. Betty lit a small lantern, so we did have a little bit of light. Big Ed said that the creatures were out there, and he warned me to stay put and stay quiet. He whispered that these creatures are huge and dangerous. We got through that night with just the cabin being hit by a few rocks. Although I didn't see the creatures that night, I did hear them making all kinds of noise. In the morning, I talked to both of the Eds, and I told them that their planks were a great idea, but we should also try to build something to keep them from getting upstairs. I was worried that they might get inside the cabin. We got a plan together, and that day we drove to town to get some more groceries and some materials to build something that would block the top of the stairs. We built a trapdoor right at the top of the stairs. Betty loved it and said it made her feel much safer. Several days later, Ed Jr. and I were outside splitting logs, and I saw someone watching us. I acted as though I didn't notice a thing, but I whispered to Ed Jr. that someone was watching us. Ed whispered back, "What do you see?" I told him that I didn't think it was a person. It looked more like a bear standing up. Ed looked like he had seen a ghost. Ed whispered to me that we needed to get inside. So I followed Ed Jr. into the cabin, and I helped him start locking down the doors and the windows with those planks. And then I heard the loudest scream I've ever heard in my life. It was like a mix of a yell and a roar, and so loud that it caused vibration in the cabin. As I put one of the last planks across the window, I looked out. I wish I hadn't done that. Just outside the cabin stood 3 huge hair-covered creatures. I heard about Bigfoot and I saw pictures, but until that moment I never believed a word of it. Big Ed saw me looking and asked how many. 3, I replied. I asked him if these were Bigfoots. Big Ed said that he didn't know what they were. The first time he saw them was about 4 years ago. I asked Big Ed if they ever tried to talk to them. Big Ed looked at me like I had lost my damn mind. He said, "No? What kind of question is that? How do you communicate with something like that?" "I don't know, but maybe we should find out." I moved the plank off the door and went onto the porch. I could hear the two Eds and Betty cursing and calling me a damn fool. I yelled out very loudly to the creatures, not knowing if they could understand me, "Please, don't do anything to hurt us. We won't do anything to hurt you. We're not any threat to you." Then I felt a quick, sharp pain in my head. I didn't think I heard anything with my ears, but I think it was more like it was put in my head. It was like I just somehow knew in that moment that these creatures needed food, that they were hungry. This must be how they communicate, I thought. I really hoped I was right about that. So I yelled out to the creatures, "I'll get you food, just don't hurt us." I told everyone what I thought these creatures wanted. Big Ed thought I was crazy, but I believed that if we fed them, it would make things a lot better. I asked Betty to help me open all the cans of tuna that we had. We dumped all the tuna into a big bowl. I chopped it up as best as I could and then made huge stacks of tuna sandwiches. We used up all the bread and tuna that we had, and then I grabbed a cardboard box and I bet I stacked more than 20 sandwiches in it. I went outside and set the box on the ground, several feet from the porch. I didn't want to get too close to them. They took the box and walked off into the trees with it. I couldn't believe what just happened. And you know that's all any of us could talk about the rest of the day. The following morning, the cardboard box was on the porch. I said to Big Ed, "See, all they wanted was food." He said, "Well, you fixed one problem, but you created another. They're going to keep expecting food now, and we can't afford to feed those things every day. We'd have to starve to feed them." A little later, Ed Jr. said that he wondered why they were hungry. Maybe they just hadn't located a good food source, we thought. So Ed Jr. suggested that we go to a place where fish were plentiful. They seemed to be okay with tuna, so we decided we'd go catch them some fish. Ed Jr. and I went fishing at a creek that was about a 15-minute drive from the cabin. We went once a week. We'd catch as many fish as we could, and we'd toss them into a big bucket, and then we'd leave that bucket right in the place where we split the logs. The bucket would always disappear in about an hour, and it was always returned. Seemed like we found a system that worked. I continued staying with the Eds and Betty over the next few years, and I got used to our feeding routine with these creatures. We noticed that the creatures disappeared during the winter months. We would stop seeing them around December and wouldn't see them again until about April. We didn't know whether they left or hibernated. We still didn't know much about them at all. Other than communicating that they needed food, they didn't put any other thoughts into my head to tell me anything else. We knew that they liked fish and bread, and it seemed like they liked most other foods as well. And whenever they were near, we would pick up their pungent odor, but that was about all we knew. Well, one day in late April, Ed Jr. and I went fishing. It was about the time that they would begin showing up, so we started back on our fishing routine. Both of us thought that while we were there, we smelled that odor that smelled just like them. Well, as we were sitting there and fishing, we were sure that we could smell them. A short time later, we saw them at the creek. Well, it appeared that they finally found their own fish. We watched them grabbing the fish out of the water and eating it just as soon as they grabbed it, raw. We sometimes would leave a box out with leftovers, and they'd always take whatever we put out. But for the most part, they weren't coming around looking for food very often. The coolest thing that I ever saw was them dragging and leaving trees right near the spot that we split logs. They were helping us so we wouldn't have to cut the trees down. I thought that was pretty amazing. I lived cheap but finally ran out of my saved money, so I got a job at a gas station not too far from the cabin, and I continued staying at that cabin for 12 years total. After that, I finally went back to New York. I continued to visit the cabin, usually every other year. The last time I went was in 2010, and that time the cabin had been burned to the ground. Big Ed passed away years earlier, but I was never able to find out what happened to Ed Jr. and Betty. I imagine, though, that Betty has passed on too by now, but I hope that Ed Jr. is okay. I feel that I'm one very lucky man to have that family take me in after a chance meeting, and I got to experience a clan of Bigfoot in a way that most people never get to. Okay, guys, that's it for now. I'll be back in a few days with another story. Stay safe and keep your eye out for the scary and the strange.